My guest today is so important to me. When I first became a coach, as a solopreneur, I didn't do really well sitting in my office by myself trying to figure out how to build a business on my own. I had come from the corporate world, and I made friends with my next guest. And her guidance and her wisdom and her connections and network and just the way she goes all in with everybody who's in her sphere helped me tremendously in meeting people, in understanding not only my brand but who I am as a speaker, who I am as a coach, how I want to present myself to the world. Whenever I have a business idea or something that I want to do, I run it by her because, again, Jen Dalton's wisdom and insight is unmatched by anybody that I know. So when we were speaking, she has a keynote coming up. Then she was telling me about the topic, and I was like, that is such a good topic for the podcast. Would you mind coming on and talking about it? And of course, she said she would. So officially, Jen Dalton has over 20 years experience in brand strategy. In 2012, she launched Brand Mirror, becoming a certified master personal brand strategist. In 2016, Jen published The Intentional Entrepreneur, a best-selling book that shares her process for building your personal brand as an entrepreneur. As an international speaker, she has spoken to and coached thousands of individuals, CEOs, and entrepreneurs about how to stand out. And I've been in many of her workshops and talks, and people just walk out with so much actionable gold. She specializes in helping leaders clarify their purpose and passion in order to increase their visibility, impact, and revenue. In 2020, she published Listen, a book focused on how to be authentic while utilizing her framework for having difficult conversations. Jen, my friend, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm thrilled to be here. It's a great way to spend the morning.
It's always fun to talk to people who are my friends and who are part of my life, and then you turn a mic on, and all of a sudden, as John calls me, Media Mark shows up, and I talk in a different voice and show up in a different fashion because we're trying to do business here. But so you and I were talking at lunch the other day, and you said you had this keynote coming up, and it was an evolution of what you already do anyway. Because I know you don't just work on brands with your clients, you help them become the people who can inhabit those brands, who can lead their organizations in those fashions. So this is a natural progression. So the topic today is building your leadership impact, building your leadership brand impact. Can you just tell me what that concept is?
Absolutely. When I started my business, it was all about personal brand, which was about defining your purpose and passion. And it's fantastic. And I wanted to elevate the conversation to really think about leadership. Who are we as leaders? How do we signal those around us who we are and really pave the way for creating more impact and do that so intentionally? And so I started to play around with, well, what is leadership brand? It's not a brand new concept. People have talked about the phrase, but I really wanted to add my own structure to it. How would I take a client through that? How do I take clients through that so that it's meaningful?
Okay, so what's the difference between the brand of your company, which we all know, we all understand the brand of our company. We all also understand personal brand, how people perceive us in the world, how our reputation perceives us. What is leadership brand?
When I think about a company, HBR had a really good article about leadership brand, but it really focused on who is this company? Are they good at producing leaders? And what are the values and things like that for the company? I still think that at the end of the day, we all have to decide who we want to be as leaders. So when I talk about leadership brand, it's thinking about what is your identity? It's thinking about what is meaningful, what matters to you. It's at the core, if you know those two things, it's thinking about your purpose, right? People talk about chasing your passion, which I think passion is important. However, you also have to have skills in that space, which is the purpose. I think the other elements, once you know your purpose, that allows you to be more authentic, which I think everyone is craving. It allows you to think through, now that I know who I am and who I want to be, what's the change I want to make? And then think about the trajectory. And those words that I just talked about all make up this framework of impact. So I come from the corporate space, so acronyms are your friend. And so I really wanted to have a simple, clear framework. And that's where I started and how I ended up with this language around what does it mean to really develop a leadership brand.
So quite when you're working with a client, what questions do you ask them to take them through the framework?
One of the things most people don't do is sit back and think about, who am I? Who have I been? Who am I right now? Who do I want to be? And as part of that, how do people perceive me? People often think a personal brand is similar to personal bragging, and I'm very against that. When I think about defining your personal brand, defining your leadership brand, it's really understanding 10% of who you are makes up this 100% equation, right? So your audience really defines who you are. It's how you're perceived. It's how your employees, your teammates, your executives, your family, your friends, how would they define you? Because we get into our own space and we think, oh, this is who I am and this is how everyone sees me. That's really not the case. I find for almost all of my clients, there are similarities in how they're perceived, but it's never perfect alignment. And so part of it is really reconciling, who am I and how am I showing up? And that can be a challenge, right? Being that self aware can be a little bit eye opening and painful, but it's a critical first step in either defining your personal brand, or if you're deciding you want to lead, defining your leadership brand.
Yeah, I do 360 feedback on all of my clients. And one of the things I have to do, like my client has a perception of who they are as a leader. Their boss, who usually hires me, has a perception of who they are as a leader. And then I talk to their team and their peers. And they're usually three different kind of perspectives on the person. There's some, like you said, there's some overlap. But then often I have to take into account projection. I have to take into account when
Mm,
I'm, especially when I'm talking about when I'm talking about people who work for the person. uh, I have to parse what's people's perception of them, what's the reality of them, and then what are people projecting on them,
mm.
that isn't true, but is the person's responsibility because they're the leader. So how do they deal with that? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love that. I think understanding, we always hear the phrase perception's reality. Absolutely. And you also have to add in the complexity of people. So that concept of projection absolutely resonates because everybody comes with their own baggage, experiences, things that shape how they perceive or interpret a leader and the leader's actions. So I absolutely agree 100%. I love that word.
How does that work for women? Is there a difference? Is like do women have to think about certain things in that a little bit different than men?
I would love to be able to say no, but I don't. I wish that were the case. That
Yeah, I asked the question
that the
knowing
answer
that
is
it's
no. Yeah,
completely.
I know. I wish we'd made progress. I think for women there are a lot of interesting dynamics. One is how many of you are in the room.
Yeah.
And so if you're in an executive team or leadership team where you're the only female, it gets a little bit trickier because you've got to figure out, how do I jump in without being seen as aggressive? How do I interrupt without being seen as rude, right? How do I get engaged? There's a really great article on the Post about Obama and his direct reports when he was in the White House. And the article focuses on, in a room of about 10, three of them were women, and they would coordinate in advance. I'm going to say this if this comes up, and then and then they would coordinate who jumps in to validate and reinforce. Because oftentimes, even with women leaders, you may feel like, I just said that, but the words I used didn't resonate or they just weren't heard. Someone else jumps in. I mean, it's a common story we hear often. But I do think for women, finding that language that works in the culture of the company
Mhm.
is critical, right? So that's also part of the leadership brand, is to define how you can fit, how you need to show up. Does your leadership brand, your values align with the culture of the company you're at? So I don't think it's as simple as women or men. There's so much complexity to it as soon as people are involved. And I think that the challenge for a leadership brand or for any leader is to be agile and to be able to adapt and to also know this is not the right company for me or the right group of people for me sometimes. I
Sure.
mean, we don't all work correctly or well in every single culture. Whenever I work with executives or people in mid management moving up, I think that's a critical question is what are your values and what are the company's values and will you be successful there? Because if there's any misalignment there, if you don't believe in the culture or the values, that's going to really make it hard to be an effective leader.
Oh yeah, always. So no, I'm curious. So let's say you start an engagement with someone, and you and you kind of figure out where they are, where they want to go, like who they want to be, how they want to be perceived. Now you're working with them. How do you help them gauge their impact?
Hmm. First, I think it's important to know where's the change you can drive. So even if you're leading a small team of 5 or 10 or a bigger team of 100, what is it that you're trying to affect? So 12 months from now, would you want people to use different words to describe the team? Would you want to know that your remote employees have the same engagement scores as your employees are in the office, right? What are the behaviors you're going to change that can impact how you make people feel at an organization? And it could be as simple as I, you know, a leader decides they want to think differently, especially if you have a remote team or in-person team or hybrid. How is every interaction going to be meaningful? And what are those most important interactions? Are you having one-to-ones with your employees? Do you know them? How authentic are you being with them? Do you know what their career path is? One of the biggest complaints from direct reports and employees is that there's no career path, right? And I think as a leader, knowing your people, knowing what makes them authentic, what makes them unique, and being able to cultivate that is critical. But that's only critical if it matters to you as a leader,
Right.
right? So I think identifying your goals, identifying what behaviors can I change because we can only change what we control. Maybe it's how you show up and lead in meetings. Maybe it's how you delegate. I think you pick a couple of those and you start making those behavioral changes and see what comes out at the end. Either it's employee feedback, survey results, team performance. But I always believe in designing with the end in mind. And so if you design that, this is what it will look and feel like. This is what I will see if things go well. And then back into, all right, how do I slowly get there? Because I also find in organizations and with us as individuals, it's hard to implement change sometimes. And so it can feel like a very tiny rudder in a very big boat. And so I also think give yourself patience as you're trying to steer the ship, even if it's your own ship, but for sure if it's that of a company.
Right. And would you say there's lag time? Like you start to implement change and then just to actually see the results of that change and the results of that impact.
There can be. I think it depends on what it is. I think for individual interactions, if you really elevate those and change how you're doing one-to-ones, for example, you can start to see an impact really quickly. If it's how you empower others to lead team meetings. And so I think in general, it's more of a lag. However, there are things you can do right away that make a difference. I'll give an example. And this is a personal, this is a personal one, but I think it applies in the workplace. Um, I was talking to my 15-year-old, and as a parent, oftentimes you're like, "Hey, is your homework done?" And I just thought to myself, that's really nagging. Like if that's all someone said to me, kind of like a manager, "Hey, is this deliverable done?" I'd be pretty annoyed. And so I really changed my behavior and said, every time I go by my son's room or interact, and you could do this with an employee, hey, how are you doing? Hey, I really liked how you approach this challenge. I love the way your brain is working in critical thinking, right? So recognition is one of the most underutilized immediate tools as a leader that you can use to change how people feel and change your leadership brand. And I think people underestimate the value of genuine, authentic recognition right away. I mean, with my son, for example, I saw a change right away.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, he wanted to hang out because it wasn't like I was. asking about homework all the time. And just because we try to coach people in the workplace, there's a lot of those rules apply at home too, right? It's our whole personal self, it's our whole self as a leader. But I think recognition is one that you can have a much quicker impact than people think.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of a specific client who his boss had to go through what you're talking about, and he said it took a year to change people's perception. After he changed his behavior,
Yes.
it took about a year. So he told my client, you're going to go through the same thing I'm going through with Mark, uh, and it's going to take a year. And I actually more in agreement with you. My client's charming. He really is a super good person, just didn't have the skills to communicate that way. I told him, I said, I think the impact's going to be so much faster. And then I told him the story of my mother-in-law used to say this thing. She says, she says, a good person, good all their life, they do one bad thing, everybody goes, I knew they were an asshole. But a bad person, they could be horrible all their life, and then they do something nice and everybody's like, I knew they had a heart.
They've been saved. I do think it's interesting, right? I mean, when we think about first impressions or when we think about that bad interaction, it can take up to 6 months or 7 or 8 interactions to start to change someone's perception. So I do think, again, if you have a team of direct reports, list out each person. Who am I trying to influence? Where are they at? What's their perception of me? And what do I need to do for this person? Same thing with an executive team.
That's a
If
really
you're,
good. I want to
yeah,
slow that down because that was a really good point. It's you don't want to boil the ocean.
no,
It's person by person, relationship by relationship. And if you focus on the relationships, you change that relationship. You don't change the
yes.
whole ship, you change that relationship quickly. Right. And I was just at a CEO roundtable, and one of the CEOs said he did something really bad and really hurt someone. And
Hmm.
he was mortified. And he said, that as a CEO runs through the company like wildfire. I
Hmm.
went to the person, I admitted it immediately, apologized, corrected the thing. He says, and that runs through the organization like wildfire as well, that you took responsibility for a mistake that you made.
Hmm. That's huge, right? And I think as a leader too, ego is challenging sometimes. And it's very important to be able to say, I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm going to mess up. And how do I recover? And that's just as important as everyday interaction. I mean, think if you have a bad customer service experience, as long as it's rectified very, very quickly and in a big way, you can come out of that actually, in some cases, better on the other
Right.
side. And I do think start small, right? To your point, person by person, because that's the rub of it all. None of this is easy.
Right.
It requires consistent maintenance. It's not for the weary or the faint of heart. I mean, to be a leader, you really have to decide one, leading yourself first and knowing who you are as a leader and owning that. And then deciding person by person, like you said, how do I want to show up? And for me, it's started at home first, but with every client, and it's not going to be every single touch point. It might be the first time we meet, it might be a follow up, maybe it's, hey, this person's really important to me. I want to check in with them every month. It could be a lunch like we have, right? A monthly lunch because we know we need to check in and we want to see each other. It doesn't have to be everything, and it shouldn't be because if you're trying to boil the ocean, you will fail. But I do think what are those moments that really matter to that person and to you as a leader and not and really thinking through what would be unique and meaningful for that person, for that audience. It's not about you. It's about who you're leading and what they need and are you meeting them where they're at.
There was a summary on one of your slides that I was looking at, and I thought it really kind of summarized what you're saying well. But basically, this boils down to uh, tell people what you're going to do, keep your word and do it, and then strengthen the commitment that you gave, like reinforce it. This isn't like complex rocket science, right? It's basically showing up in a certain fashion. Like,
It is. Although I will say my first client ever, Dave Connolly, he's the first person who wrote me a check 12 years ago. And we were talking one day and he's like, Jen, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And I was like, yep, that's so true. And so I think one powerful thing is if you know your leadership brand, you can figure out where do you want to spend your energy and focus,
right.
and where shouldn't you. And that's huge. And I think you as well, if not better than everybody, time is your worst enemy. So how are you building things into your time and your calendar to give you space to do these things too? And so in a lot of ways, I think people forget that this takes time. Before you go to a one-to-one, how are you planning or preparing in advance? Before you lead a team meeting, what are you hoping to accomplish? How are you preparing? Thinking about how are you going to show up focused with your priorities clear for you. When you have that clarity, it also gives you a lot of freedom in the moment to be able to react better too. Right. And so a lot of this is if I know who I am and I know my compass and I know who I am as a leader, that creates a lot of clarity on what I say yes to or no to, when I push back, when I don't. And
The value system.
it is, it's an operating system for yourself. And
Right.
sometimes we need to step back and revisit that and go, have I been living up to that? And then you have to be able to say, gosh, here, yes, here, no. Great. What do I want to keep, stop, start, and change and start to put into place? And I do think it's day by day. Every day is a new day, and you can start it over and rethink your interactions. But yeah, leading people is hard. And I think that's why we still struggle with finding great leaders. Companies are either developing leaders to fit a specific mold, or they're not developing them at all. And in reality, it's more complicated. Each individual has to decide who they are as a leader, go through that process for themselves, and hopefully that set of values, that operating system, is really powerful for that company too, because both need to be clear. A company needs to be clear on here's why we value leaders, here's what we'll tolerate, here's what we won't tolerate. And you as a leader have to decide here's what I'll tolerate, here's what I won't, and here's who I am. I think that gives everybody a lot more clarity. It makes it easier to go faster, to move forward.
Yeah, I have what I call the empathy map in the Rising Leader Handbook, and for to become a trusted advisor, I tell people to take it on themselves, their responsibility to learn all that about their boss and about their peers. Like, learn everything that you like. As a leader, it's your responsibility to learn it for yourself. As a trusted advisor, as a peer, it's your job to learn it about everybody else and who they are. So that, because again, I think people forget that they don't have a job and they're a leader. Their job is success through others. Their job is influencing, enrolling, and being better people. Like, that's just the job of a leader. The better you are at understanding people, helping them get where they want to go, helping them help you get where you want to go, the better it's going to be.
Well, I think the challenge is there just haven't been that many leaders that have been great examples.
True.
So usually people lead and manage, which are two very different things, based on what they've seen or experienced. And not necessarily, especially if you go from being a doer to a leader, that transition, thinking through now, how do I want to lead? If you were never taught that, if you ever saw that, then you don't know what it looks like. And if you're not given space to figure it out for yourself, then you're not going to get there. But I do think maybe it's finding other leaders and organizations. I mean, in your mind, when you're working with clients and there's a leader, but maybe there's lots of managers around them, but not leaders yet. How do you advise them or help them navigate that? Or maybe not everybody has said, yes, I want to be a leader.
Well, when it's on the peer team, that's a tough one, because that's a workaround. That's a really, it's important in rolling skills. Like how you're never, it's not your job to change that other person, but it is your job to work with and create with that person. So I use
Mm,
that as an opportunity to really hone enrollment skills. What makes them tick? What motivates them? What's important to them? How do you align that with what you need them to do for you? Right. And then right now I'm working on a development plan for one of the companies I work with, the leadership team. They for their next level of leaders, they want more people with ownership of the company, because as it's a partnership type thing, an apprentice type thing. So as the senior leaders start to move out, people move up. How do we teach them,
mm,
or how do we instill ownership of the company when the culture in general in work today is less loyal? I'm not saying a bad less loyal. I'm saying people have options. People are very interested in their are much more interested in their personal lives, in their life quality, and not so much
mm,
willing to be a slave to a job position or money. So how do you inspire, right? Like now we have to inspire. We can't expect people to want. So that's a challenge. So it's development plans. It's learning each
mm.
person, learning each person's value system, and then how do you ignite that value system to be supportive of your company?
I love that delineation you made between expect and inspire and transitioning into that space. I think for a lot of individuals, that lack of career path, lack of feeling like the company is as invested in me as I am as invested in them. And with COVID and post COVID, and even leading up to that, I think you saw people really think through what are my priorities, which ended up for a lot of people, especially in the sandwich generation, kids, parents, spouse, time really is matter. Nothing is guaranteed. And now the expectations employees have for companies, whatever role you're in, is much higher. And yet you still see companies require people to come back to the office. And what I think most people don't tolerate is a monologue style leadership. If you're going to tell me what to do, but it's not a dialogue, not so interested. If leaders
And they
keep a
can they can
dialogue
and they can
going,
afford to be not so interested right now. There are
yes,
times when when that works because there's no other alternatives and you need
right.
a paycheck. Right now, there are alternatives, so it's forcing people to be leaders.
Yes, and we'll see how people do with that. I mean, I think it's exciting, I think, to decide to be a leader, and you can be a leader from anywhere. I don't think you have to be in a formal role to lead,
Right.
right? You can be a new employee and you can decide, who do I want to be as a leader? How do I want to, go on this journey? You can lead a team. You can go from being, leading a team to being an individual performer, and you still have to lead because you still have to influence those around you. You have to manage up or manage out, potentially even without authority. And so I think a leadership brand, as soon as you can start really dedicating time to think through, what is the impact you're trying to make? What's meaningful? What's the purpose that matters to you most? What is your purpose? Thinking through that authenticity. What do you want to change? And how do you create a trajectory for yourself as a leader? As soon as you can answer those questions and start down that path, that's the key to beginning.
Amazing. What a great framework. What a great perspective. That's why I wanted you to come talk about it, because rarely do I hear like just a little shift in the way we talk about this stuff. So great job, Jen. I love the keynote.
Yeah.
I love your topic. If people want more of you, where can they find you?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn, and you can also find me at brandmirror.com. More than happy to answer questions. If you go to LinkedIn, you can schedule time with me. You can have a complimentary consult. I'm always happy to answer emails. You'll find my email there as well. And just continue the dialogue.
Amazing. We'll put all that in the show notes so you don't have to remember any of that. You can just go click and find more of Jen Dalton. Jen, thanks for being on the show, and thank you for helping me launch an entire career.
That is very generous and very kind. Thank you.
It's true. To the rest of you, I appreciate you a ton. Yeah, leadership is no joke, but it's so rewarding. And as a personal growth journey, there's nothing better. You want to find out about yourself, become an entrepreneur. You want to find out about yourself, become a leader. I love you a ton. Have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Oh, come on. Where's my, they hid the record button. There it is.